So, Nintendo finally revealed the Switch 2. And I gotta say, it's about time. The leaks were going absolutely crazy, especially recently. I wanted to go into this with more excitement, more surprise. I first watched this in the morning, and I was just like, oh, I've seen this before. Like, Nintendo really did not get ahead of the leaks. There were so many leaks for this darn thing. We had a pretty good idea of what it looked like weeks prior, months prior, but no more notable of a showcase was shown than Genki at CES, the Consumer Electronics Showcase. They straight up showed like a 3D render of the Switch 2 to kind of showcase their accessories. Like, they're an accessory maker for video game consoles as far as I can tell. And yeah, they just straight up showed a 3D render of the Switch. It wasn't confirmed or anything, obviously, but when we saw this trailer, it was pretty obvious. Genki definitely showed the Switch 2 a few weeks early. I don't know if that was like a PR stunt or if it was like, you know, get their names even more out there, be more notable, infamous, whatever. They are on more people's radar as a result, I guarantee that. But yeah, it kind of spoiled the surprise a little bit for the official announcement. I'm a little upset about that, but I think Nintendo probably should have just done a better job of getting ahead of it, to be honest with you. I've honestly been tired of the leaks and stuff for quite a while, but here we are, the official Switch 2 announcement. And yeah, let's talk about it. So I want to talk about the hardware. That's going to be like my main focus here. And I know I'm a little late to the party. I apologize for that, but I figured I'd give you my 2 cents. Throw a little bit of a Yoshi spin on it towards the end here. And, well, honestly, I think I'll be giving you my, like, 10 cents because I've got a lot to say about this thing. So why don't we start with the hardware? It really looks like Nintendo played it safe with this one, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It basically just looks like a bigger, better Switch. Better is subjective, I know, but it kind of just looks like they're going for that vibe. It's the Switch, but bigger and better. Literally bigger. It looks like it's going to be like a 7.5 or 8 inch screen versus the Switch's like 6.1 inches or something like that. This looks like it's going to be a pretty beefy device as far as like pure size goes. Like, I think about how my Switch looks in my hand. You know what? Let me go grab that for a sec. I think about how the original Switch looked in my hands. Like, I'm just envisioning holding the Switch 2 in my hands like this, and it's like a good inch or two bigger. And I'm just thinking, like, the Switch was already a pretty good size. I'm pretty happy with this form factor, but I think that I will enjoy having a larger Switch. I think it's gonna feel like, yeah, this feels right. I am looking forward to seeing what it feels like, how hefty it is. If it's too much, too cumbersome for like portable play, I don't really know. But I'm looking forward to finding out. It has a U-shaped kickstand now. The design of the kickstand has, well, I have an OG Switch here, and this little kickstand ain't doing much, I'll be honest. They did improve the kickstand for the OLED model of the Switch, and this kind of looks like it's an iteration of that. It looks like it's got exactly the same sort of swivel and bend, like the same sort of range of motion that the Switch OLED's kickstand looks like. It really doesn't look that different from an OLED's kickstand, except for just visually and less plastic, like I said. So yeah, I mean, it's a good kickstand choice. I look forward to using it. I've never used a Switch OLED before, and I look forward to seeing what that's like. Couple small notes on the hardware just before we really dive deep into the bigger stuff. There's a USB-C port on the top of the console now, and honestly, I feel like people have been looking for that feature for a while now. That seems like such a small thing, but I think the Steam Deck has it, and I think that I think it's just a good idea overall. Like, for those of you who have played the Switch in portable mode and tried to charge it, for example, you still have like the charger coming out the bottom. That is absolutely not ideal. More significantly, it's going to make a difference for tabletop mode. You couldn't really charge the Switch in tabletop mode in the original configuration. It just wasn't really a thing you could do. It sits on the bottom of the unit, obviously. Like you set it on a tabletop, the USB-C port is on the bottom, it's gonna be blocked, obviously, unless you have like a third-party stand from like Genki or something, I don't know. Not ideal. Now they have the USB-C port on the top, that's awesome. I do wonder if it's gonna be able to, not dock per se, but if you could plug in a USB-C cable, like, and display out from that. That would make it interesting for like on-the-go situations, I guess. Not really like a huge factor. If it is, great. If it's not, that's fine. That's not a huge factor. I can't really imagine too many scenarios where you'd want to like dock it out of the top instead of the bottom. Like it's too much of a hassle to plug it into the bottom, so you plug it into the top. I just don't see that happening. Still though, love to see that. And the headphone jack too. With all these different like smartphone companies getting rid of headphone jacks and like wired earphones just feeling like they're antiquated or just going out of style or whatever, it's nice to see the headphone jack still here. It's not like the Switch 2 needs to have like a waterproof rating. That's not the kind of device that you're gonna want to take in the pool or anything like that, obviously. So headphone jack, it already had openings for the fan and all that, so yeah, you love to see it. I know I do anyway. I still use my wired headphones a decent amount. All right, let's talk about the Joycons. So obviously they're newer, they're bigger. I love the fact that in this trailer that they put out, they show the Joycons getting bigger, but the buttons also got bigger. That's really good to see because the Switch's face buttons are pretty small. Like, just for comparison's sake, here's my DS. You can kind of see how the face buttons on the DS are pretty much the same size as the Switch Joy-Cons buttons. They're small, and like, I've got small hands. It's not that big of a deal for me, but I always did enjoy the larger face buttons on the Switch Pro controller. These obviously won't be to that extent, but even just a little bit bigger will make a big difference, I think. Same with the joysticks too. They seem a little bit bigger as well. They're still Switch Joy-Con joysticks. They're not going to be like a full controller joystick. It's not going to be the same. But they do seem to be getting a little bigger, maybe a little bit deeper. Yeah, I think that the groove on the top is going to be a little deeper. So it'll be interesting to see how that feels. Of course, when we bring up Joy-Cons, we can't really ignore the fact that the existing Joy-Cons had all sorts of drifting issues. There was a lawsuit over the Joy-Con situation, the drifting and all that. And I think that didn't really go our way per se in the final ruling. Like, we didn't really win versus Nintendo on that, so that kind of stinks. But at the very least, Nintendo has offered free repairs for Joy-Cons up through most of the generation for most regions, or at least the United States. I don't know if I can really speak to the rest of the regions, but you know, I had to send in my Joy-Cons once or twice to get repaired. I replaced a couple of my Joy-Cons joysticks with the Hall effect sensors, the what are they called, the Gully Kits, the Gully Kit joysticks that claim to never drift, and I found that that's not entirely true. I have had a little bit of drift issue on one of them, but you know, I resync or recalibrate the joystick and it turns out fine, so I can't really complain. That said, I will note that they don't really have to be Hall effect sticks to not have drift. We had plenty of joysticks in the past that like were more resistant to joystick drift than the Switch's Joy-Cons are. It's not like Hall effect is the be all end all. You can make a better standard joystick. If it is Hall effect, great, but if they don't say that it's a Hall effect joystick, don't lose hope. It doesn't mean that it's going to drift immediately. Just have faith. Don't worry too much about it. I'd say, like, don't lose track of it. Don't let Nintendo go on it, obviously, but it will probably be fine. It will probably be better than the Switch at the very least. Now, something that they showed in the trailer and something I've heard rumored for a while is that these Joy-Cons are gonna have, like, mouse capabilities, and as I'm watching the trailer here, it does look like there's like an optical sensor in the side of it next to like the Joycon electromagnet connection for connecting to the Switch itself, it does look like there's an optical sensor in there, and the way that they show the Joy-Cons kind of running around on the surface with Joy-Con straps or whatever they're called, they look very mouse-like. I think that was on purpose. They're probably showing that this thing is going to have compatibility with mouse controls, and I don't really know what that's gonna mean for the games or what they can do with it, but I will admit that's an interesting, I don't want to say gimmick, I think it's an interesting feature. And I think the first thing I can think of that you could do with that is easier ability to play like RTS games, real-time strategy, or like your grand strategies, your Civilization 6 and Warhammers and stuff like that. I think that it'll be a much easier time to play that on the Switch 2 than on the Switch 1, just because of that mouse sort of functionality. And it's not really confirmed one way or the other, but it very distinctly looks like they're trying to show mouse capabilities. That's pretty cool. The Lenovo Legion Go has that. The handheld PC Lenovo Legion Go does have that feature where the controllers snap off the side just like a Switch does, and you can use the one as a mouse. It's cool that Nintendo's bringing that to a more mainstream device, I want to say. Like, the Lenovo Legion Go is obviously more niche. It's a much more expensive device. There's not going to be as many people buying it. Whereas something like the Switch, where the price, I think, will be fairly accessible, especially compared to a Windows PC, the usability will be much more straightforward. I do look forward to seeing what the general masses will think of that kind of feature. I kind of mentioned earlier that there's an electromagnetic connection of the Joy-Cons to the Switch. Showing in the trailers, like, the Joy-Con kind of snaps off the side of the Switch instead of sliding onto like a rail system. Like, the existing Joy-Cons on the Switch, I'm sure you're well aware, have this rail system where it snaps into the place and is held by like a physical button sort of thing that kind of retracts as you hold the button on the back of the Joy-Con. I never had a problem with that. I thought it worked, if not a little bit finicky at times, especially when you have newer Joy-Cons. But I have heard of scenarios where the rail and the mechanical connection kind of wear out. And I think that going electromagnets is a perfect idea, because magnets, I've read recently, hold their magnetism for essentially forever if you're caring for the magnet properly. Obviously, it's not forever, but like the article that I read said, like, under ideal conditions, a permanent magnet will lose like 1% of its magnetic capabilities in the course of like 100 years. I don't know if that same thing is going to hold true here, being electromagnets. I'd imagine that the electronics will wear out much faster, but I do think that it's going to be a fairly strong solution, and I think it'll last. I don't think that as many people are going to have as many issues with the Joy-Cons falling off here. The biggest thing that I could imagine happening is people accidentally hitting the button on the back of the Joy-Con to like disable the electromagnet. Like, that's the biggest thing I can think of, but it looks like it's out of the way enough where you're not going to hit it on accident, so that's good. And it's interesting to note that the Joy-Con grip, the dog face controller from the Switch 1, it looks like that Joy-Con grip is going to also have that electromagnetic connection. That's really cool. I like that a lot. And then the last thing to note about the Joy-Cons attaching to the Switch, there's a new sound effect that Nintendo is using for connecting your Joy-Cons to your Joy-Con grip or your Switch. Instead of a snap, it almost sounds more like a clap. Like, I've seen many people say, like, oh, that's a much chunkier, loud, kind of aggressive sounding snap. And I'm like, am I crazy for thinking it sounds like a clap? I'm pretty sure it's a clap. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think, but I think it sounds very much like a clap. Regardless of what kind of sound it's supposed to be, though, it's very satisfying. It's a nice big chunk instead of a snap. I don't know. I think that marketing is going to go really well for them. All right, let's move on to the screen. This is more in the speculation sort of territory. Well, I guess first let's start with the size of it. The bezel I'm not super impressed with. I think the screen could have filled out more of the body, similar to like what the OLED does, but it does look better than the original Switch. Like, the original Switch's bezels on the screen are very chunky. This at least looks a little better than that, but I think that they could have made it even less bezel-y. had a bigger screen to body ratio. Again, I point to the OLED as an example. I feel like that's like the golden standard at this point. But that also brings up another question. Is this screen going to be LCD like the original Switch, or is it going to be OLED like the Switch OLED, obviously? And I've heard rumors and leaks that it's going to be LCD, and I think that's realistic. I assume that they're going to go with an LCD screen just to keep the cost down, and I'll get back to cost in a little bit. I think they'll save OLED screen for a later iteration, kind of like what they did with the original Switch. I do think that's a realistic expectation to hold. I am expecting an LCD, and if it's OLED, I'll be very pleasantly surprised. As far as resolution is concerned, the original Switch had a resolution of 720p on its screen. And I'm expecting that, well, one, being 8 years newer, and two, being like an inch or two larger, I am 100% expecting that this screen will be 1080p. If it's not, that's a downright shame. But I have a little bit of faith here. I think that they are going to make this a 1080p screen. And in 2025, come on, don't give us 720p. It's got to be 1080, right? I hope so. Now we're going to get a little bit further into speculation territory. Obviously, Nintendo didn't talk about internals here or specs or any of that stuff. We're still left in the dark with what kind of performance can we expect out of this thing. There have been a number of leaks, though, and I want to kind of talk about what the current leaks suggest as far as the internals. So the current leaks are saying that the CPU is an ARM Cortex A78C with 8 cores. I will note that the original Switch, its chip, the NVIDIA Tegra X1, is an 8-core chip, but something important to remember is that had an iGPU, as in integrated graphics. Both the CPU and the GPU were on the same chip, sharing the same cores. It didn't have hyperthreading, so it was 8 cores only and 8 threads. So yeah, I'm expecting that separating the CPU and GPU into 2 separate chips, you're gonna see a pretty solid performance gain just from that, to be honest. Moving on to the GPU, again, the current leak says that it's an NVIDIA T239 Ampere. The name Ampere is the name of the architecture that the NVIDIA RTX 30 series desktop graphics cards uses. So I wouldn't expect like 3060 performance or anything like that. Current leaks are saying that it's probably going to be roughly equivalent to a 2050. It doesn't have as many CUDA cores as a 3060, for example. Still, a 2050, an RTX 2050 performance, I think that's pretty solid, honestly. I do think that this is going to be quite the performance bump, given that it's Ampere technology, roughly equivalent to 2050. I think we can expect a pretty solid jump. And then the RAM, it looks like it's going to be 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM. Versus the 4 gigabytes of LPDDR4 RAM in the original Switch. So that's, not only is it 3 times more RAM, but it's also a generation newer, so that's quite a bit better. And finally, storage. The current leaks or rumors are suggesting 256 gigabytes for onboard storage, which doesn't sound like a lot. It really isn't in 2025, but you know, it's better than the 32 gigabytes we got on the original Switch, I'll say that. And I'm pretty sure there will be SD card support. I don't remember reading that anywhere, but it kind of just makes sense, especially for a mobile thing. That's what we're hearing as far as like the internal specs of the thing, as far as leaks are concerned. I don't expect that Nintendo will go as into depth as all that. In fact, they still don't list their amount of RAM for the original Switch on Nintendo's website, so I wouldn't expect them to be super forthcoming, but I think you can expect a pretty solid jump here. Some people are saying that they're expecting a PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 4 Pro performance. I think PlayStation 4 is reasonable, and I think that would honestly be like really good case scenario for the Switch 2 here. A portable PS4, essentially, that's awesome. And considering that we're kind of starting to hit a ceiling as far as like how good graphics are getting, like we're seeing more frames, we're seeing ray tracing, we're seeing all that kind of stuff. But when the layperson like myself looks at a video game screen, sometimes being on console especially, sometimes I struggle to see the difference between like 30 frames per second and 60. I mean, when I see 60, it's obvious, but I don't know, like 30 frames per second I'm used to, and I'm not a pixel peeper. I don't really look for anti-aliasing, and like I'm not a stickler for ray tracing versus rasterized graphics. I think I'm going to be pretty pleasantly, well, pleased with how the Switch 2 looks, if it's anything like a PlayStation 4. And I do want to note that it's not going to be like an apples to apples comparison between something like a PlayStation 4, for example. Especially with modern advancements in NVIDIA's software, we can expect to see something like you know, DLSS or deep learning super sampling algorithms for Nintendo's NVIDIA chip here. Maybe like upscaling from an internal resolution of, say, I don't know, 720p up to like, I don't know, potentially 4K, who knows? And maybe even some frame gen. I don't know how you guys feel about like frame generation technology, where like every other frame is like AI generated, kind of to be like, kind of like interpolation on modern TVs. Like it kind of inserts a frame where there's not usually supposed to be one. It's AI generated. That's a feature in like modern DLSS software. It's an advancement in technology, and I'd assume that being NVIDIA, this console, the Switch 2, is probably going to take advantage of that in some capacity. So it's not gonna be an apples to oranges sort of thing. I don't think that 4K is out of the question. It would be an upscaled 4K, not a native 4K, but I don't think that that's out of the question. Still, I've played with the Switch 1 for 8 years at this point, nearly 8 years. And honestly, after how the games looked on Switch 1, there were some games that looked just atrocious, like some that rendered out at 540p or whatever. It looked like someone smeared Vaseline on your screen. Like if you were playing Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, I heard it would drop down to 540p at times and just didn't look very great. Games like Witcher 3, like incredibly impressive that they got it running on the Switch at all, especially considering that they had a full, like, they had the full game on the Switch cartridge. That was crazy. But it still lacked in terms of performance, and I don't think that that was the ideal experience. So honestly, the Switch 2, if it can do 1080p 60 frames per second 90% of the time, I would be as happy as a Yoshi in Yoshi's Story eating his favorite fruit. But yeah, I think that you can expect a pretty strong upgrade in terms of graphics. Don't expect it to be like a PlayStation 5, but if it's PlayStation 4, I think that'll be good enough for most people. Now let's talk about price. Obviously, Nintendo hasn't put a price out there, but I'm expecting this to be a little bit more costly than the Switch. I think that Nintendo's reasonable ceiling here for price is $400, and I think that that's what I'm expecting the Switch 2 to be released at, is an MSRP of $400. You can buy a PlayStation 5 digital version for $450. If Nintendo goes to that cost, I think that most people are going to be like, why wouldn't I just get a PlayStation 5 instead? Heck, I bought a PlayStation 5 recently, and I got it on sale for $425 with a disc reader. If Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be $400 or plus $400, I think that's a very risky proposition, and I don't think that that's going to go well for most people. Best case scenario, we see a price drop from the Switch 1 here, and then the Switch 2 ends up being $350. I highly doubt that. I am expecting $400. As far as software compatibility, I was very excited a few months ago when Nintendo officially announced that the Switch 2 is going to be backwards compatible with Switch 1 games. And that's a huge deal, but there was a bit of a question mark after that first announcement, and that was, is it just digital? We're seeing a move in the video game industry to digital and streaming services here. Physical seems to be going by the wayside for the most part. I mean, from experience, I'm seeing a lot less physical games in places like Best Buy, for example. Like, there's still some, but it's not as readily available as it used to be. Physical is definitely on its way out, and that's why I'm super stoked to see that the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be fully backwards compatible with physical Switch games. I feel like I might have dodged a bullet on that one. If the Switch 2 was not going to be compatible with physical games on the Switch, I don't know exactly what I would do. So, yeah, pretty stoked that they're gonna be all these games here are gonna be compatible with the Switch 2. Very happy about that. The other thing that they mentioned here is that Switch games might not be fully supported on the Switch 2. I do think that that's a bit of a conservative disclaimer. I think it's more like the Switch 2 isn't going to be compatible with Labo, for example. Maybe not even Ring Fit Adventure. I don't know. But I have a feeling that most of the Switch games, certainly all the ones that I own, are going to be compatible with the Switch 2. And yeah, I don't think that we should look at that disclaimer and be super concerned. I think it'll be fine. I think that's pretty much all I want to discuss about the hardware, but you know, I do want to talk about a couple of other things. There was a new Mario Kart shown in the trailer here. It looks like they soft announced the next Mario Kart. It does look like a new Mario Kart. I don't want to like full delve into that. I'll leave that to more qualified channels to like do a deep dive on what the new Mario Kart really has in store. But it looks like what I'm hearing is 24 racers. It looks like the characters have different models. Like, people are noting Mario looks a little bit more chubby, like his Mario 64 render, I guess, from Mario Kart 64. Donkey Kong looks more like his movie appearance, and it sounds like that might just be the de facto Donkey Kong design moving forward. Princess Peach doesn't have her motorcycle biker outfit anymore. That's kind of a letdown. There's definitely some stuff to look forward to with this new Mario Kart. It looks like it's going to be bigger. It does look like it's going to be a new Mario Kart, not Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or anything. But I will say that putting out a new Mario Kart, and I'm assuming this is going to be a launch game, and that would make all the sense in the world to me, considering that Mario Kart 8 is the 5th best-selling video game of all time. You heard that right. 5th best-selling video game of all time, Mario Kart 8. That's wild. Obviously, Nintendo is going to want to capitalize on just the Mario Kart hype right now, I guess. I think they're going to put out Mario Kart 9 or whatever it ends up being called, like Mario Kart Road Trip. I don't know. I think they're going to put that out pretty much as soon as they reasonably can. If not at launch, certainly within the launch window, like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was. I think that's going to be a system seller. Nintendo announced that there is going to be a Nintendo Direct for the Switch 2 in April, early April. The funny thing is, some people saw the date 2024. Sorry, 2025. I'm not going to name any names, but I think some people were watching the UK trailer and mixed up kind of the date sort of format. The date format is different in like the PAL regions, for example, than it is in North America. And they saw February 4th is what they read it as, and they're like, oh, that's only a few weeks away. Like, settle down, guys. April 2nd. And that feels like it's a decent ways away. There's going to be a lot of leaks and rumors and stuff between now and then, I guarantee it, especially on April Fools. How many people are going to see the announcements on April Fool's Day and be fooled by them for the slightest of moments? I am going to try and avoid the internet on April Fool's Day. Absolutely. I already do, but it's going to be even more so this year. I also want to note that there's going to be some hands-on experiences available for the Switch 2 in various different places. I think I'm hearing like PAX East is probably going to have it. It's select locations, but there will be some hands-on experiences with the Switch 2 lined up between April and June. And I think that points to a June release date for this thing at the earliest. And it makes sense. That was kind of the time separation between the announcement of the original Switch in October 2016 to March 2017 for its actual release. A 5-month sort of separation between announcement, reveal, and release. I think that makes sense. I'm thinking sometime in mid-June, maybe late June, for a release for this thing, which for me, that's a great bonus. That's right around my birthday, so maybe I can justify getting one at launch, especially if they have, you know, a really compelling game at launch. Mario Kart 9 may not exactly do it for me. I love Mario Kart, but it's not going to sell a system for me. But if there's a new 3D Mario game or a new Zelda game right at launch, if I can save up enough money by June, I'll be there day one. But speaking of launch games, I think that brings up a question for Yoshi fans such as myself, and if you're watching this, I assume such as yourselves. Can we expect there to be a new Yoshi game at launch or within the launch window? No. If there's a Mario game at launch, there's a pretty good chance Yoshi's going to be in it. But I do not think that there is going to be a Yoshi game, like an actual Yoshi mainline game, mainliner spin-off, whatever. I don't think we can reasonably expect one within the launch window. Now, something I want to note is there's not like a real solid definition for launch window. From what I can tell, it can mean anywhere between 3 months to 6 months within 3 to 6 months of the release date of the console. So if my assumption is correct and this is releasing in June, up through the end of the year, December is like the launch window. And I don't think we can expect a new Yoshi game in that time. To give you guys an idea, a mainline Yoshi game has never been released within the launch window of a Nintendo console. Never. Not even once. The closest we got to that was Yoshi's Island on the GBA. The GBA port of Yoshi's Island. It released on September 24th, 2002, which was about a year and a half after the Game Boy Advance came out. So that's the earliest in a console's life that we've ever gotten like a mainline Yoshi game, and it was a port. Yoshi games tend to come out at like the midpoint to later in the life of the Nintendo console. There was one instance where a Yoshi game released within the launch window, or the launch window. That was Yoshi Touch and Go. It released like 2 months after the original DS came out. January 27th, 2005, Yoshi Touch and Go came out on, versus a November 21st, 2004 release date in North America for the DS. So that's within like 2 months, but that was a spin-off. I don't want to get my hopes up for a new Yoshi game, spin-off or otherwise, coming out in the launch window. And part of the reason for that is that Yoshi just isn't a big priority for Nintendo. It's like, it's not a system seller like Mario or Zelda or Splatoon or Mario Kart are. It's not that huge of a deal, I don't think. Obviously, everybody loves Yoshi. Like, I can't think of anyone who like looks at Yoshi and thinks, oh, he looks gross, why would anybody like this guy? Yoshi's a very lovable character. It's not like Nintendo hates Yoshi or anything, but his series of games, the best-selling one was Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo, and that sold like 4.25 million copies. That's like a drop in the bucket compared to what a 3D Mario or Zelda would sell, or especially Mario Kart at this point. It's just not that important of a series of games to put out early in the console's life, and I think that's why they don't really prioritize it. I guess I should note that I'm kind of being like a little bit dreary and drab about this whole situation. Like, don't expect a Yoshi game until like 3 or 4 years into the Switch 2's life cycle. I know I'm kind of being pessimistic, but I will say it's worth noting that Yoshi's Crafted World came out about 2 years after the Switch did, and it was announced at the June Direct of 2017, just a few months after the Switch came out. Can we expect news of a new Yoshi game coming out within the launch window? I think that's a reasonable expectation. We'll see. but we're not looking like we're gonna get a Yoshi game within the first year or two of the Switch being out. And if my assumption is correct, that will be the longest gap between Yoshi games that we've ever had. The current record holder is Yoshi's Island DS to Yoshi's New Island. That was about a 7.5 wait between those two games. Yoshi's Crafted World turned 6 years old in March of this year. You feel old? I feel old. But yeah, if my assumption is correct and we get a new Yoshi game, say, I don't know, June 2027, that will have been a full-on 8 years since Yoshi's Crafted World. That'll be a new record, and that's not a record that I'm super excited about. I think that the best that we can reasonably hope for, if we want a new Yoshi game in the next year, I think a reasonable expectation would be a port of Yoshi's Woolly World to the Switch. Not even the Switch 2. I wouldn't get my hopes up about a Switch 2 port. I'm thinking a Switch port, to be honest with you. It seems like an appropriate swan song for the Switch. I will say that seems like it would be kind of an unfortunate parallel to Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World releasing like a month before the Switch came out on the 3DS. If that happens for the Switch, well, it won't be ideal, but I think that it would still be a good version of the game to buy. Even if the Switch 2 is out and Yoshi's Woolly World doesn't come out on that, if it comes out on the Switch, I'll be happy. So I think that's the best we can reasonably hope for Yoshi games representation on Switch or Switch 2 in the next year or two. That's what I think about the Switch 2's reveal. I had a lot to say, and there's a lot of question marks still left on the table here. There's a lot of info we still need about this thing, and you can bet that I'm going to be watching the Direct. I doubt that I'll stream it. Usually the Directs don't air at a good time for me to stream, but I will definitely watch it, and I'm looking forward to some awesome announcements and some more information about the Switch 2. It looks very promising to me. I can't wait. Very excited. But yeah, feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comments. And let me know, are you excited for the Switch 2, or is it a little more lackluster than you were hoping? Let me know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So yeah, thanks for watching this one. See you in the next video.